So, hello everyone that has joined so far, and welcome to today's UX Design Build Hour. I'm Jill, Head of Partnerships here at Noloco, and I'm very excited to be co-hosting today's session alongside one of our valued partners and certified Noloco experts, Diana Kirby, who I'll let introduce herself in just a moment. But some very quick housekeeping before we begin the session. This is being recorded, and it will be shared with everyone that has RSVP'd, and we'll send it to everyone after the webinar concludes. So this means, you'll have the chance to recap anything that we do cover, rewind, and catch up on all the great insights that Diana will be taking you through in a moment. The last thing I'll say is that this is a live event. So for those of you that are online with us today, we definitely want you to make this an interactive session. Please use the Q&A box to pop your questions in there, and we'll have a chance to answer questions throughout. We'll see how we're doing in terms of number of questions, but most importantly, at the end of the session, we'll reserve some time for questions that we can take on today's topic. So on to the topic of hand. Today's session is all about learning how to enhance the user experience inside of your Noloco apps. So over the next hour, Diana will be offering an interactive mix of short overviews on core UX principles, followed by hands-on demonstrations of these principles being implemented inside of Noloco. So, hopefully by the end of this session, you'll actually have some very practical insights that you can begin implementing in your own Noloco apps. And that's the goal of today's session. And our expert host, Diana, brings a huge wealth of experience in UI and UX design. So yeah, I think you're in for a really engaging session. But Diana, I'll hand it over to you now.
Awesome. Thanks, Jill. Always love getting to hop in and connect with Jill and Dara and the Noloco team. I've popped another question there in the chat that as I'm introducing myself, I'd love for any of our attendees to answer. But it's how often do you use visual design in no code? Sometimes, always, or never. And I'm going to use these terms kind of interchangeably. Visual design, UX, UI. In the large scheme of things, they sometimes mean different things, UI and UX especially. But for the purpose of our call today, you may hear me use them interchangeably. And as I mean them in the context of Noloco, it's thinking about more the visual configuration of things, as well as the kind of functionality of your development. And so just kind of curious about what your thoughts are in the forefront if you think about your development in no code. How often do you think about the visual design component? Sometimes, always, or never. But I am Diana. I founded We Actualize really early in 2020. So it's been a bit, but it's looked very different throughout the years. My really initial career got started in psychology. So that's where a lot of my kind of underpinnings and conceptual frameworks come from. But then I also ended up doing a lot of project management and operations and business development. And it's essentially where I found no code. So the very first platform I found was Airtable. This was many years before there was a Noloco or any other real competitors or things like that. It was before Airtable had interfaces. Like we were very limited in our capacity to build things in a really kind of front end way. There really wasn't even a back end front end type for Airtable or things like that. It was what you see is what you get. So you had to be very strategic in the configurations that you did because we had less resources and less options. And now there are wonderful resources like Noloco, where we can build both a front end and a back end right inside the platform. So that's how I got started. I found Airtable because I needed a solution for my team that I was working with for project management. We were working out of only email, and I was like, this is terrible. I don't want to do this anymore. What could we do? So I found Airtable, and then I just never looked back. I've been working with Noloco for probably about a year and a half now. Found them for a very specific client that was looking for a portal system, and just learned on the go, learned as I was building. And then about 3 years ago or 4 years ago now, During the pandemic, I also went back to school essentially and got an additional certification in UX design because it really fit well with my background in psychology. There's a lot of underpinnings of UX within psychology, but I also had this kind of other tech world where I had been building things in Airtable and things like that. So UX was really kind of the bridge there for me. Okay, so why focus on UX in no code? Why is UX kind of relevant? Where does it fit into this capacity? And it's really kind of fascinating from both sides because I end up having to explain no code when I'm in a UX world as well. And so, where does it kind of fit in all of our building within, especially Noloco? I just wanted to share really quickly three things that has been beneficial to clients I've worked with in using UX. And, things like usability testing is more UX research, and that's like a whole other topic. So we won't go deep into that. But just to share, where has UX made a real valuable impact that has been able to be seen from an ROI, from a sales perspective, from a business outcomes perspective when it comes to how I have built in no code. So one of those is ensuring that your call to actions are able to be found, or the data, the information that you want your users to find, is able to be found. So we, kind of function from a prototype MVP, get the quickest draft that makes sense that you can to speed to market. And oftentimes I will implement usability testing or user research to try to see, if what we built is making sense to our end users. And so the very first one there, we found we had built an entire, MVP. And one of the components we needed from a sales perspective, from a general functionality perspective, no one that we tested could find it. And then after we made a change from the feedback we got from them, then once we launched the product, that item ended up being the second most clicked item, representing 13% of all initial clicks there. And so it can make that much of a difference where we think, oh, I've got this thing here. Of course, everyone can see it. And then you get it in front of people who aren't used to it and they don't see it at all sometimes. So being able to have that level of data and that much of an impact can be really impactful. Secondly, here, the decluttering data. I did kind of an audit of a website once that, once you get into things, you just keep going and you keep building, you keep expanding. And sometimes less is more. So we had like 20 pages of a website. We were able to really condense that down to more 5 pages so people could more quickly find the information they needed, instead of, what we needed them to do, or the kind of sales process being way buried in a long process. So lastly, this one was actually the very first Noloco product I did. Is the client came to me and one of their main research goals was wanting to determine viability of monetizing their product. If they built out this entire product, would it make sense to their target audience? Would it be something they'd be open and willing and want to buy? Would that be a viable uh, you know, use case for them to pursue? So we won't dive a ton into those things, but I just wanted to give kind of a high level overview of what is UX, where can it fit? Why can it be beneficial within a no code space? And then today we're really going to focus on kind of just some basics, excuse me, basics. So there's tons of things to learn in psychology and UX, but I also love giving the basics because it can really help shift the way that you think about your build. And that's really my goal for today, is to kind of explain some real tenets of UX and kind of those baseline principles. And then as you're building, my hope is you'll think about some of the things that I said, right? Or it'll pop in your head, and even if you don't remember who said it or where it came from. But you can make these really kind of small but immediate changes in the way that you build just by knowing some of these tenets is my goal for today. So we won't go super deep in the psychology of it. We could, and that would be fun, but maybe just for me. So we will go kind of just high level on these different aspects, and then I'll demo what this could look like in a Noloco app. So the very first one is called serial position effect. And this has to do with, so I'm going to say humans a lot because from a psychology place, I like to call us humans. So humans, users, people, they are most likely to remember items at the beginning or at the end of a list. So if you think about, full like UI design, this was a mobile app that I designed for ride sharing. And often in apps that you're using or websites that you're using, the very first or the last item are going to be the items you are going to remember most easily. And so it's often the items we will put there that you will use most frequently. So within a ride sharing app, the very first thing you're going to usually want to do inside that is get a ride, right? Request a ride. And then the end, a lot of times people are looking for their settings, their account, their general information. And so really positioning those at the top and at the bottom, or at the front and at the end of a list, depending on how your navigation menu is set up. So what can that look like in Noloco? So I've got here just some general data in my Noloco app. I went ahead and did this data initially so we could save some time there on our time together. But essentially the use case that we're going to be building through today is a Christmas or holidays gift tracker, right? So if you have it could be used for, birthdays or special events or things like that. But in the US, we call them the holidays. I know that holidays in the European region sometimes just means vacation. So you're going to hear me say holidays. It also means Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate. And so often at that time, there's so many people you're trying to remember, did I get this gift for this person? There's also a lot of like social responsibility around, oh, I got to get something for my child's teacher or coach, and I don't want to leave anyone out. And so it can be hard to keep track of all those things. So I was kind of playing around for some fun with developing in Noloco a gift tracker, and what would that look like? I love that Noloco has the mobile responsiveness and progressive web app downloads. And so my thought is, I'm building this on a desktop, but most often people would probably be using this on their phone when they're out and about. And they're like, oh, I've got to get Jill something for Christmas. What does she like? Oop, I've got her wish list here. Okay, let me grab this and then I can mark it off my list. So we've got here our users. Right now it's just me. And then we have what I call my gifting groups. So if I have a lot of people to take care of, I may want to put them in groups of like, okay, here's my family, here's my friends, here's my pets, here's, my community members or people that I want to keep track of. Maybe I have, an entire family, we have a price limit, right? Or say, okay, in our family group, we're only going to spend $50 or 50, euros or things like that on our each individual person. So I can track that as well. Within that, we also have a linked relationship to our gift recipients or our people. And so our people who are part of our groups. So I love fun names. I also like animals. So Sir Puppington is our dog, and he is part of our family is forever group. I also did some fun in a different one, fairy tale friends of just like the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and like, fun things like that. Because why not? I had a client once where all of our fake users were movie characters. So we had a lot of like Harry Potter in there and Star Wars and things like that. And so you just got to have fun with it sometimes. But our last piece of data here are our purchases. So these are items we have purchased for, or we have on our wish list for our respective people that are inside of our gifting groups. So that's kind of the data structure of what are we hopping into in Noloco, and how can we start building. So thinking back to that very first option, the serial position effect. When I go into build inside my app, a lot of times, if I don't think about it initially, I'll move them around before launch. But the people in app most likely are going to be wanting to have an item here for their profile. So we would start them here. I may actually pull this at the end after we get in some other things. But I would put in a profile. Right now, this is all users. I love, 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 love the permission settings in Noloco. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time doing that today, but I spend lots of time doing that for all of my Noloco apps, is being able, when I come in as Diana, I'm only going to see Diana's user profile. And I only want to be able to edit Diana's user profile. And so we have our main user here. This has got a bunch of stuff for their purchases and their group. Don't really need that there. We just want their main contact information. We have a phone in here? No. Okay. So we've got our full name and our email. And I don't have my full name in there. So let's go ahead and change that. Yes, I created this previously and then copied it. So it's pulling over from there. Well, we'll just pull in our first name and last name. And then I want them to be able to edit it. I'm always pulling through. They'd be able to hop into their user information. We probably would actually pull it into here, would be how they could edit their information. So I would change this as well to be
The live demo curse. That was the way.
really think. So I was thinking about it, right? I was like, I don't know if that's ever actually happened. It's like, oh, you have lots of things going on. We will pause you. But essentially what I'm doing here is I'm setting up the profile itself. So I would have, excuse me, the user's information and their ability to change their own details in their profile. We're going to just refresh and see if it'll go. But from the concept of serial position effect, we're going to have this either at the beginning or at the end so that they can quickly access it. Because a lot of times you do want to access that. You need your account, you need your profile, you want to be able to hop in and make quick changes. Another item that's going to be very integral in this app itself is probably going to be my purchases. So my purchases or my gifts. Throughout our time today, we'll also add in a couple other ones, but these are probably going to be our first and last. And I would go in and change these icons to kind of be relevant here. So I'll just change this one quickly. So we've got our purchases, and then we would have our user profile. And so then as we build things out, we have the two main components we want them to be able to visualize and access most quickly. The next thing is going to be typography hierarchy. And typography hierarchy, as you can see in our video here, in our image here, if you read it from top to bottom, it looks like it says, don't be happy, worry. Because often people read left to right, depending on your culture, it could be right to left, top to bottom, bottom to top. And so this really means be happy, don't worry. But the typography hierarchy of your brain, used to reading in a certain way, makes it more complicated to read this example. So typography hierarchy as it comes to UX and building, I like to think about it as like the eye doctor's office. So I don't know how it works at other places, but here in the US, when we go to the eye doctor to check our vision, they give us a very big chart that at the very top, it has a massive E. And then as you go down, all of the letters get smaller. And it's much harder to read the smaller you go. And that helps them test, you know, what is your vision? How can you see it? But I like to think about it that way from typography hierarchy. And I'll read this slide as we go over it to make the example as well. That typography hierarchy, it directs users to read systematically the way they naturally read. And so if you're working in a place of localization of you might have individuals who would be reading left to right, but some might be reading right to left. You would want to consider the cultural applications there as well for your typography hierarchy. But we want them to read systematically the way they naturally read, to highlight areas of focus, or to include larger sections of text, i.e. paragraphs, right? So we would not want paragraphs in these massive text sizes up here. Would be very hard to read and take up a lot of the page. Not everything needs to be the largest size or exactly the same. The hierarchy in this context helps users find the most important information first and then group items of text underneath their respective sections. So just as an example, the difference between these two, my brain first goes to highlight areas of focus. And so then it kind of has to pop around and go back to the top to read, and then try to kind of squint to read the ones at the bottom. So it's just a little more complicated. And we humans don't really like complicated, and we don't really like when things take a lot of time. I share this as well because the more I do this work, the more I start seeing it out in the world. And so I was on a website once. I don't even remember why, but I was on a website and I was like, wow, this is really hard to read. Why? And it was because the titles of the sections were actually the exact same size as the paragraphs. And so the titles were very small. And even though they were bold, so it kind of was different from the paragraphs themselves, all of the text was very small. And so it made it very difficult to scan and very difficult to kind of scroll through and very quickly find what I needed. And so that's where typography hierarchy can really help your users get into the process of where they need to be more quickly. And in Noloco, one of the things I love to do with that is actually using the Markdown options within the subtitles. And if you're not familiar with Markdown, these are the three heading sizes that you can use within Noloco by putting in like one, hashtag two, or three to create your different headings. And to showcase that in our app, we're going to create some gifting groups. And we want to pull our gifting group up here. And I want to do these as cards. Now, one of the ways you can do, so this general, move all my people. So this gifting groups here, you could put as a title, or you could use that Markdown subtitle to decide which heading size you wanted. Now, I very seldom use the breadcrumbs, but they're great when it works in my functionality. So I'm just going to turn those off. But you can see here the difference between, we've got gifting groups or gifting there. I oftentimes will do two just because I like the boldness of the one less. It's just a general personal preference, doesn't quite matter. But we can see there now we've got our different heading sizes. You can also utilize that in the fields themselves. And I love doing this for, card sizes like this to really emphasize the top item. And so when we look into this, you're really just seeing all the information all at once. That is a little bit harder to see, like if we had 50 of these, right? Ooh, which group am I looking at? And so I like to change the first item here. I pop off the label because I don't need it. And then instead of displaying it as default, I will display it as a heading. So you have these headings here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. The general rule of thumb for UX is the very top title is the only one on a page that should be heading size 1, because that helps you, go down in the typography hierarchy. So the highest I would want to do is maybe heading 2 here, because we've got a heading 1 there. That's kind of large. So I might do a 3 or a 4. Okay, I like that a lot better. So we've got 3. And just to, again, show you the difference between coming to this page and being able to quickly see, here is group that I'm looking for. I can click into that versus the default there. Bad about that, right? But it allows you to more quickly utilize the features that Noloco already offers you to jump into there. Now, this is great timing, so I'm going to go back to my slides like that. let that load on its own. But the next item is going to be Miller's Law. And Miller's Law has to do with something called cognitive load. And cognitive load is a very general term for we can only keep so many items in our brain at the same time, right? So, from a very neuroscience place, the literal capacity of your brain to keep items in working memory or at the forefront of your mind is limited. You can only keep so many things in there at a time. That is why multitasking is not quite exactly a thing. But from practicality's sake, it is also why we utilize certain groupings to remember numbers more easily. So here in the US, this is how we often do phone numbers. So if you could look at this number, it is a lot harder to differentiate each of those individual numbers or remember it. So that is why we put phone numbers in these chunks or sections, right? So we've got a section of 3, 3, and 4 instead of a section of 9 or 10 all at once. The same for the US, we have a social security number. It's an identifying number for every individual person. And instead of having them all in a line, we have them in sections of 3, 2, and 4. So the cognitive load concept, the psychology research behind it, it was research. The psychology research behind it is you can only keep about 7 items plus or minus 2 in your brain at once. And so that's kind of the same thing here for the numbers. These are, about 9 or 7 numbers. You can only keep that many at once, but it helps if you utilize something called chunking or grouping. So putting them into groups. It also helps make things more scannable and essentially feel like they take less time or less energy to complete. So one of the things I love about Noloco is the option for collapsible sections. I don't know any other platforms right now that offer that option. Could be, I just don't know about them, but I love being able to have the collapsible sections for information. So if we go into here we've got our families forever. We don't need this notes section here. And we'll pull back into here. Okay, so we start out with some really fun information that gets automated for us, which is fantastic. That's awesome. And we've got a little bit of information here. So let's pull out, yes, that's fine. We'll want our persons eventually, our gifting groups, and our persons. Now we don't want this purchases here because that's not telling us a lot. We're going to add it in here and pull our list of purchases there. Now, usually I would be going into our visibility permissions and making sure that the only purchases that are being shown are ones that are part of this family is forever group. We have a lot of data here. And so one of the things we could do, we have our collections here. We could also pull this in as details and put in our 2 people, maybe there's 10 people in here, different things like that. And so oftentimes I'll utilize details in the base record, and then I will utilize collapsible sections. This example won't be an exact one-for-one because it's fake data, but I've used this a lot for clients, used it for just the other day, where we had quite a bit of information. It was a very long form that the clients were needing to complete. There was probably 10 sections in it. And that is a lot of data to look at once. And so I did these detailed groups and then allowed collapsing of all of the sections so that they could quickly scan the list of 10 items and say, "Ooh, I need to look at group photo and I need data from there." And they could uncollapse it to be able to view that data more quickly. And so it helps kind of condense the amount of data you're looking at once, but also allow for more scrollability and selection of the exact data you need at that time. So love a collapsible section. I also love being able to implement this in forms. And so if we were going to add a new person. So we have our groups, purchases, gift recipients is going to be our person. And if we wanted to add a new person, we've got several things here for them to implement. So I love using the sections as forms as well to help for the same reason. It feels like it takes less time because you're able to compartmentalize that data from one section to another. And that feels like it takes less time of, okay, I did this component and now that's done. I did this component and now that's done. I did this component and now that's done, than having a full list of, oh, I have 20 items to complete. And as humans, that feels like too much. There is research behind that other than just a subjective feeling, but the research shows us that the more time something feels like it takes, sometimes the less valuable it feels, and sometimes the less engaged we are. You'll get more people like quitting and just saying, nope, I'm not going to do that. That takes too much time. So implementing sections here for forms helps with that process as well. So very quickly, things I would do here is maybe just contact details, and we pull in name, email, phone number, address, and then maybe this one is our group details. And we would pull in our relationship and what group are they going to be part of? Do we have any purchases yet for them? And so you can see how we already kind of grouped those things together and just visually how it works a little bit differently than just having all of them here on the same page. That is, again, especially pertinent when you have a lot of details. So again, that same client I was working with the other day, there's probably, I don't know, 50 questions on that form. So a lot of times these forms will have a lot of data. And so it can be really helpful to do something as simple as just grouping them in sections to help with the functionality and your completion rates of those forms. I also love, very quickly, dividers and containers. I won't go a ton into containers because we could spend lots of fun time on that. But if I have lots of data that can't be used in the collapsible sections, I always implement dividers. So it's something very simple, but it can make big impact where you're essentially creating those chunked sections by implementing the dividers themselves.
Slightly off topic, but one thing I'd love
Please.
to show, because I've just seen it a few times and I'm like, this is a tip that I feel some people miss in Noloco. But if
Yeah.
you go to your cards display that you configured,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're demoing hierarchy, your typography hierarchy. But what I love to show is the group photo. So this is a little trick that sometimes it goes unnoticed. So if you drag that to the top of the list on a cards view, you'll get a new configuration option that will only appear in that context when it's at the top of the list. And that is to use the card image as the hero on the card. So then that just looks immediately just so much more eye-catching, I think, combined with, everything you mentioned so far. So yeah, I always like to show that because often missed.
Yes, absolutely. No, that is perfect. I also love that feature as well. And I've used that for things like clients. And so we need images of the home here where they want to be able to see, okay, the address, but also the home. So yes, that is a fantastic feature to utilize as well. Thanks for popping that in there. I forgot.
Okay.
All right. So the next thing we're going to do is Hicks law. And it's very similar in the process of the things we've talked about, but it primarily has to do with the concept of decision fatigue, right? We're all pretty familiar with decision fatigue. Essentially, the more options you have, the more brain energy it takes, and the more time it takes, and the less likely people are to do it. So I put this phone number item in here as kind of a joke because I was like, that's terrible, right? No one would ever want to do that. But we humans are a little comical sometimes. And I actually had a similar experience like this in a different platform where I had to submit a ticket and say, oh, I don't want to do this. Please do something else. Where it was a time field and I was having to scroll in to do like 407, 408, 409. And I was like, no, please, please make that better. So they did, which was great. But we do our best with what we have at the time. And I am not a developer, so I can not a full hard code line by line developer, so I can't even speak to the complications it would be to take something from one thing to another. I just know more so the user's experience of it and my own at that point. So it still happens. It does happen. We all do our best, but it makes things can make things complicated. So decision fatigue, this is way more complicated than just typing in your number. Some of the things I love about Noloco are the action buttons when it comes to decision fatigue. And those would take a little bit longer to demo. So I'm actually going to show one that I've already made to kind of help explain that. But as you can see here in the one I had made previously, we do have our awesome photos here for our gifting groups. I love using photos within the title header as well. And for those, all of these I pulled in here are stock images. And so you can use things like Unsplash or Pexels and things like that. And you can use Noloco's feature for either downloading and pulling those in as a photo, or you can pull in a URL of that stock image to use as the cover photo as well. And you can do that both in like the main kind of collection page, or if you add your own title section, you can add an image to the title within a base record as well. I got distracted by that. So let me go back to what I was talking about. Action buttons. So action buttons, let's see, we've got our family is forever, and we have our multiple buttons here. Now you can see that when I come out of that, there's actually quite a lot more going on than what the user is actually seeing. And that is because I've set these action buttons for the visibility to only show up based on certain contexts, so that the experience the user has is specifically based on where that user is in the process. That lessens the amount of information they need to go through and read and understand and comprehend. And then it makes it more personalized as well. So the total amount of detail we could have is, this is there a price limit or target for the members? This is not showing to them anymore because they do have a price limit set. If there didn't have one and they just said no limit, it would no longer than that, right? So it takes away that extra decision every time they come in here to not have to see that, because that decision has already been made. I submitted a template for the Noloco's template competition. And on that one, we had a lot of kind of approval of different items. And so we had multiple buttons based on, do you want to approve, reject, or send for review? And I would set the visibility of those buttons based on where the process was. So if it was in review, then they would be able to see reject or accept. If it was in accepted, it had already been accepted, so they didn't need to see rejected or reviewed anymore. So you can kind of set up both the visibility as well as the use of action buttons to lessen the amount of decisions people have to make. Another item I love that is just always, it's just perfect for the builder side of things, especially, but also the user side, is the concept of being able to fill out, getting ahead of myself, gift recipients, an address field just based on a single line text. And so Noloco launched this a little bit ago, and I loved seeing it. You can utilize it as a single line text or a text field and display that as an autocomplete address field. And what I love about that is, one, users are very used to it. Let me have to publish that first. Users are used to it because we fill that out pretty frequently. But it also helps lessen the amount of data users are having to input in the form themselves. So before this was an option, we were having to do multiple fields for an address. So one for street, one for state, one for county, one for country, all of those items, one for zip code. And then on the back end, we were having to pull all of those together in a formula field, right? To pull all those address components together. And it made for some very messy data, where especially if we were doing things with maps where we needed a full address in a very specific way to be able to pull, like longitude and latitude coordinates and be able to really accurately put that on the map. We were running into a lot of problems because the general user error of that was that people were inputting their addresses in all kind of wonky ways and in different ways. Oh, perfect. Thanks. Yes. So you got to have Google Maps set up for that to work. Usually I do that when I'm not live. So perfect. But it is a great option to have where it will auto select your address. Another thing on the Noloco side that Jill actually reminded me. So again, the builder side of things, I didn't even think about it because I don't have to think about it. So one of the things I love about Noloco is that you really have pre-mapped data. So once you pull in, and this is not, it is helpful for the end user in the sense that it takes the builder less time to launch that product. But me as a builder, it is very helpful for me because I am also a user of this product when I am building something. So essentially, once I have launched or integrated my data into here, I then don't have to think about that again, other than turning on or off this toggle, right? I've added in my data. This is my gift recipients. They also do a fantastic thing of auto nesting a form and a base record inside. So I get three things from pulling in my data or creating my data in a Noloco table. And I don't know why it doesn't want to open. It might just be slow. But I get the data itself, and I get a base record, and I get a form. And if you've utilized other platforms, this is why I didn't even think about it. But in other platforms, I have had the experience where, I kind of start from nothing. I've got to pull in the data. I have to create an individualized base record as well. And when I create a form, I've got to, create that from scratch as well. So that when I go to create new gift recipients, I have to say, I need a field and I need it to be a text field. And I need that text field to be mapped to my name field. I need an email field. I need that field to be connected to my email field in my, external database or et cetera. Within Noloco, I literally just have to turn on or off a toggle. And I like calling this the teal toggle because it's teal. And so it's helpful for me to remember it's just the teal toggle. You just toggle it on or toggle it off. And I feel that a lot more when I have that instance where I've needed to create the data itself for people to be able to see, create a form for them to be able to edit it. And then also, visualize the data on a more individual granular base record level. And I've had to create each of those fields every single time is when I feel that most often. So that is an asset of Noloco. I even overlooked because I don't have to think about it. There's less decision fatigue. I want to be mindful of our time and give us some time as well for questions and things at the end. So this will be our last concept we will take a look at.
One thing, just one very quick thing. I know conscious of time.
Please.
Very quickly, on the form that you were just on, or on the fields on the form you were just on. I think one thing definitely worth calling out is like the hidden values that you can pass through to fields.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And from like the end user's perspective, we might know because they're logged into Noloco, right? They're already authenticated in here.
That's right.
We can grab their email address, we can grab their first name, their last name, and then simply hide those fields from the form from the end user. And of course, they'll just pass through behind the scenes. So we capture that information on the record. So yeah, a huge win for UX and making, I suppose, decision fatigue as you were
That's
discussing
right.
a moment ago.
Absolutely. Yeah, I use that all the time as well. Not having to have users input the same information over and over and over again. We don't want to do that, right? We're like, oh, I gave it to you once. Why don't you have it? That is something we can set up as builders where those are hidden, they're passed through, they're auto linked. And so that takes less questions for them to have to do. You can even see it's already auto linked here to this group because I went from the Family is Forever group and I'm adding a person to that group. And so that even auto links for me because it knows that it's going to connect there.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely.
Love it. I also won't demo it, but I love automations. And so I love that Noloco has the option for internal native automations, and anytime you can automate something, if it makes sense to, is always fantastic. Before the sake of time, our last item here will be the peak end rule. And the peak end rule has to do with your overall experience of kind of product or the journey that you have inside the product. And I put a little mountaintop here, a lot of mountains here in Colorado, but I also just enjoy mountains in general. And I like to think about the peak end rule when it comes to if you're going to go on a hike, right? You're going to go hike up to a mountain. The moment you're probably going to remember most is when you finally get to the top, right? You can see the view, everything is gorgeous, or you can see everything, or maybe it's a letdown and everything is foggy and you did all that work and you can't see anything. But that's going to be one of the items you're going to remember most in that experience is when you get to the top or to the peak of that experience. The other time period you're going to probably remember most is going to be when you get to the end, right? So you've done this entire journey at the beginning. You're very excited, you're eager, or maybe you aren't and you're like, oh, I hate hiking. I don't want to do this. But you get to the top and you have that peak experience. And then when you get to the end, you're like, oh, okay, I did it. I'm so glad I'm done. I can go to my car and go home. And so this experience of the peak end rule is also relevant for your users and their experience of your products and your apps. And so again, if we think about that ride sharing journey, the kind of peak or most intense moment, most integral moment of trying to get a ride share is the requesting of a ride, right? You want to be able to request the ride. You need the ride to show up, right? That is the most intense moment. If that doesn't work, the app doesn't work, right? If you would try to request a ride, there's no rides. The functionality isn't there. And then the end of the experience is when you have arrived at your destination and you can provide, a rating or a tip for your driver. And with Noloco's granular customization, we featured a couple of those things here, like visibility permissions. We didn't talk as much about multi-step action buttons, automations, all of these things you can do in a very granular, customized way. It means you can funnel those users into the pathways they need to be on, but also help them get into the pathway from really any point that they try to enter it. And so if we think about the use case here, I'm going to pop to the one that I had already made. But if we come here to the beginning, right, they'll come here to their homepage and they have their kind of pre-mapped journeys that they have available. And they can start essentially from any place they need to. So if this is the first time they've come into the app, they don't even know what they can do with it. I'm always a fan of kind of home navigation pages to help you really understand the app's functionalities and help you get to where you need to go more quickly. So we've got a navigation here of, okay, I've just popped into this app. What are things I can do? Well, I could create a gifting group. I could add people or pets. I could start my shopping list, or I can jump in directly and start tracking my orders. That is the kind of start of their journey. The peak or most intense moment for them in this journey, when our essential goal for them is to be able to track gifts purchased for their friends and family over the holidays or Christmas. The peak moment would be being able to add purchases. And so we would want that form of being able to add purchases to be as uh, engaging and as simple as possible. And so this one's just for our adding gift recipients. But if I was doing this add purchases, I would want this to be fun. I would want to add, images there and, fun. I'd probably want to add the confetti after you've done your first purchase or after you've put in a purchase. And Noloco has a really fun success message item where you can add in confetti. And we've all probably experienced confetti in some version or another on um, technology, and humans are actually very simple, and a lot of us really like that. It's, whoa, you did the thing you were supposed to do. Good job. And so we would want that peak moment of adding your purchases to be, really integral and seamless. And then the end experience of them where they know that they're done, right? Oh, you've done all the things. You get that success message. You get the, yes, you subscribed. Yes, you completed this. The end point to be very visible for them to know they've gone through the whole journey and that they are finished with what they're doing. But I want to end there. There's many, many more fun things I could talk. A lot of really awesome resources Noloco provides within their academy and expert program. You can connect with people like me and some wonderful other experts as well. And if you have any questions in general, very happy to answer them. Would love to connect and reach out. I love connecting with new people and talking about these things because ultimately a lot of us build these things essentially to solve a problem or to help people or to, close a gap in an industry. So always happy to connect.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Diana. Really, really great session. Really enjoyed that. Let's see if there are some questions that have popped in. I actually do see one that did pop in, and keep them coming, by the way, everyone. But from Jessie, how do you balance the amount of page navigation for users? For example, having fewer top level pages in the navigation bar with more hidden nested pages versus having many top level pages that are all one click away, but perhaps too cluttered. Is there an ideal number of clicks for a user to reach any particular page within the app? So kind of two-part question there, if you want to take the first one around.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So there isn't at least that I know of, kind of an industry standard of you can only have this many or less. So I kind of I err on the side of less is more. Because users will all be coming into it for different purposes. And so just from the same concept of like the chunking or putting them into groups, humans can actually make those decisions more quickly if they can scan and then, kind of go in a tree model of, okay, I'm looking for, profile, and then I'm looking for my payment methods, as opposed to 20 items where one of those is a payment method. It's a lot harder for us to scan when the navigation menu just expands. And so if you have things that are similar, I do recommend putting them in like a Noloco folder and then nesting those other items so that your users can jump into that navigation more quickly.
Brilliant. I think that's really well answered. Couldn't agree more. And I think there was sort of like a two-part question. So is there like an
Oh,
ideal
yeah.
number of clicks for a user to reach any particular page within an app?
That's a great question. So, again, not like a set, this many, but I was looking up, how long will people stay on a website before they're like, I'm out. And I think it's like 15 seconds is what the research was saying, right? And so it's a little different here in a Noloco app because you already have a little bit more buy-in and engagement that you would on a regular website because the person is signed up for whatever it is you're building in Noloco. So they've already kind of done that extra step. They're inside the app. They have more reason to be there than maybe just, searching a general website. But I do love that you asked that because when I work with other people, other clients, other developers, a lot of times I will make that statement when we're trying to solve something and I'll say, that's too many clicks for the user. And so it is a little bit more subjective of like, oh, that's just way too many steps, that you're having to do. And so there's not an ideal number of clicks necessarily, but again, I lean on the side of less is more. And if there is a possibility for us to do a process in less steps, I do try to advocate for that. So I would encourage, as you're building something, asking yourself that of like, how many steps, how many clicks has my user had to do to find this? Because when we build it, we know it. And we're like, oh, you just go here, boop, 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 boop. But if you aren't familiar with it, walk that back, from the very most, internal spot. Oh, they've had to click 7 times to get here. That's quite a lot. So, generally try to keep it like 3 or less if we can help it. But also, as you're taking them on that journey, as long as you're guiding them into the places they need to go, it doesn't feel like as many clicks. If they know where they're supposed to go next, it's easier to hit that next click than having to, oh, where do I go in here now? What is the thing that I'm doing now? So guiding them on that journey also helps with the click numbers.
Brilliant. I think great question and a great answer. So thank you for that, Diana. There are no more questions at the moment, but if anyone does have any follow-up after today's session, you know where to find Diana. Her contact details will be, included on the recording that we send out and in the email that we send out post the webinar. But yeah, I suppose conscious of time, we have 2 minutes left and just some very quick wrap up before I leave you all go. But thank you, Diana, for a fantastic session, first and foremost, but thank you all for joining in today and engaging with us on the webinar. So for those anyone who's new here as well and looking to dive deeper and learn more, we definitely encourage you to check out the Academy as Diana showed an earlier slide. We're going to be posting this content there as well in the course section of the Academy. So you can catch up there as well as on YouTube, and we'll send the email as well with the link to it. But most importantly, we'd really love to hear your feedback on today's session. Diana has a wealth of knowledge on UX, and she has said she's very interested to running a part 2 follow-up session on more topics in this category. So we're going to send a survey out just to kind of get a quick pulse check on how you found it and if anyone would be interested in that follow-on. I'm going to post it in the chat here, but you'll also receive it in an email. But if anyone wants to just fill it out very quickly while it's fresh in their mind, please do. And yeah, that's it. So thank you again for joining. And yeah, looking forward to seeing what you build now with these new UX strategies and skills to hand. And yeah, that brings us to end. Have a great day, everyone, and talk to you and see you soon.